who's going to win, who's going to have the power. And then it's very easy to sort of label the other with narcissism or bipolar or any other label. But what it's really about is that power dynamic, that the fight to who has the power in the relationship.
This is like the new version of men are from Mars and women are from Venus. It's like men are narcissistic and women are bipolar.
Welcome to the Me and Us podcast, a conversation between two relationship therapists who talk about real-life issues based on what they learn in a clinical setting, working with clients, and from their own experiences of motherhood, marriage, and parenting.
Hello.
Good morning. Hi, Elsa.
Hi, Olivia. Here we are meeting virtually again.
Yes, and welcome to the Me and Us podcast. And today we are going to be talking about this idea, men are narcissists and women are bipolar. What do you think of that, Elsa?
That is something that I have heard very recurringly in my clinical sessions. And I have noticed it and I have been surprised at how often these two words, bipolar and narcissist, come up in relational dynamics. So I'm very excited to discuss this because I've been thinking about how loosely we use those terms and how present they are. And, you know, I was kind of thinking about how often we find ourselves putting labels to people and to things. And I kind of wanted to approach this session with a book next to me, and it's a DSM-5, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. And you know this very well, Olivia. We study this, and it's basically a book that includes specific criteria to come up with a diagnosis, much like a doctor would, you know, to say if someone is diabetic or to really diagnose with any other physical illness. And so I'm keeping this next to me throughout today's podcast in case we need to reference it. But what do you think? Have you noticed this come up for you?
Yes. I mean, I think that's how we sort of started talking about this. I've seen this for years now in my practice because I work with a lot of couples. And it would make me, you know, smile because it was sort of used in humor sometimes, you know, and I've definitely noticed, you know, women would come in and say, my partner's a narcissist, and they would just go into this whole explanation. And then I've heard men say, you know, she's bipolar, she's all over the place, so emotional, up and down. And so I thought it was really interesting, but I've noticed that it's really become sort of a cultural phenomenon, and it's really used outside of the therapy room. And I'm sure you've seen it, you know, in articles, sort of how to deal with a narcissist or, you know, how to get away from a narcissist. So it's really become much more of a thing. And it's fascinating.
And I love the perspective that, you know, that you observed it in humor sometimes. In my experience, I have observed it as a weapon in fights. You know, like I love you and I tolerate you until you become too much this way. And then I'll bring out the big guns, and the big guns often is that label. And what I've noticed is an incredible amount of anxiety and doubt and fear in relationships where people are saying, am I this? Like they actually start to question it. And what I've really noticed is that people feel unable to answer their question. So once somebody puts a label on you, or once you fear that your partner has that label, sometimes people are very unsure as to how to figure this out.
I think that's also probably where gaslighting came from, right? People are being just thrown at these labels and probably don't even know the clinical definition of them and start believing it, right? Or question, am I this? Am I not this? Everybody says I am, or my partner says I am. So to me, it's also, you know, I was thinking about just sort of what does it say about where we are as a society, and just how high anxiety is generally for us to be using these labels in the way that we are. We throw that in the narcissist, the bipolar, And what's the in between? There's no conversation anymore, right? It's sort of like where we are. Anxiety is so high in politics, and labels have more and more become important to people, right? To attach a label to yourself, but also to others. And how much of that is really about the other or about the self?
That's so interesting. So you're thinking that the label allows us to, so it has a function on a personal level and towards the other. Like if there is a certain behavior that I don't like in my partner and they are labeled a certain way, then I'll either feel more comfortable or I'll either be able to understand better.
Right. Or calmer, right? It's sort of, there's a calming effect of being able to label something and sort of put it in a box and say, this is what it is, right? And I think that is for oneself, but also for others, right? Because how many clients do you have come in, at least I do, who think about the attachment theory? You know, I am avoidant. I am, what's the term?
Anxiously attached,
anxiously avoidant, all
more
of
secure.
those things. And they feel better when they can do that for themselves. But I think it's also goes to the other, you know, especially if it's a behavior we don't like, that is a threat to us, then it's very easy to sort of throw, okay, you're a narcissist, you're bad, you're toxic, I can't be around you, right? And it creates sort of that polarization where it's like there's just too much difference where there's no connection then left. You can't even have a conversation
So after the
anymore.
label, you are disconnected. That's what you're saying to some degree.
To some degree. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I would agree. And you know, what I think is interesting is what happens after the label. How do you relate to this person in your life after you've labeled them such? What changes? Because, you know, I can say, oh, you're bipolar. Okay, great. That, you know, I conceptualize that to mean a challenge, or now I understand you better, or I can temporarily calm myself. And then what? Mm-hmm. What is that going to mean for you and this person? Do you know what you're going to do afterwards? Does that mean you end the relationship? Does that mean that you stay in it, but now you find different tools? Does that mean you need to accept, or does that mean that then you ignore?
Right.
So to me, regardless of the label itself, it's like, if there's this behavior or this pattern that doesn't work in your relationship, what are you going to do about it?
Mm-hmm. And it's almost, you know, I think we were talking about how it's also like a power dynamic, you know, let's say a woman, I mean, it can be any, but it's a power dynamic for who's going to win, who's going to have the power. And then it's very easy to sort of label the other with narcissism or bipolar or any other label. But what it's really about is that power dynamic, that the fight to who has the power in the relationship.
And who do you think has the power? The person who labels or the one who gets labeled?
It depends. I mean, sometimes both label each other, right? I feel like now it's more and more becoming, you know, I mean, I think it depends on the relationship and the person. Somebody can feel, I mean, like we said, you can feel almost like you start to believe, am I this? Or you question yourself. And I think it does, you know, it depends on sort of how much self you have as a person too, right? To sort of fall into that or not.
Yes, that's a really great question, because sometimes we would think of the powerful person as the one who does not have the mental health disorder or the challenge, if you will, the one who labeled, like, I'm coming from a position of I'm better and that's why I get to tell you that you have this.
Mm-hmm.
But also on the flip side of that, think about the power that the person who is, you know, demonstrating these behaviors, whatever they may be, has on this other person. You and your behavior impacts me so much that I'm in a position of having to label you, to understand you.
Yeah.
So, I think
and then where does the conversation go? There is no conversation. It ends.
It
ends. But
ends.
one thing, when I was thinking of humor, and this is sometimes where I really have to smile about this, when I hear clients sometimes using it, and sometimes more in a humorous way, to think about what is this also sort of a biological, is there something biological to it that where men are maybe painted more as narcissists and women more bipolar, right? And my thought was, what can women, for example, learn about men, to maybe take some of that, what they call narcissistic, and use it for themselves, for their benefit, right? And vice versa, for men to use, how often do women say men are, not emotionally available? Or right, they don't share their emotions, they're not emotional, and what can they learn from somebody, a woman who diagnosed as bipolar?
I love that you bring this perspective, because the whole time I've been thinking, this is like the new version of men are from Mars and Venus are from women are from Venus. It's like men are narcissistic and women are bipolar.
Right.
But what is really interesting? Well, I love that you bring the biology and just the gender differences. Narcissist is mostly prevalent in men, like 50 to 75% of cases are for men. Interestingly enough, that's not the case for bipolar. Bipolar is pretty much 50-50 men and women, right? In terms of like actual numbers of diagnosis. So I thought that was really interesting, but I do definitely think that we use these labels to mean a couple of things. I think, in my opinion, narcissist is used as a synonym for like being mean or somewhat of an asshole, pardon my French. And I think bipolar is used as a synonym for being emotional.
Oh, definitely emotionally unstable, and narcissist, I would say selfish too, self-absorbed, entitled, those kinds of words, I think, are automatically now sort of associated with, oh, you're a narcissist, or you must be bipolar, you're all over the place, you have too many highs, too many lows. And
so it's a little bit of the misuse of the term, and how we associate it to traits that are more often seen in each of the genders. Because, I kind of wanted to bring back my little DSM-5 here and go, for example, narcissistic personality disorder has a lot to do with grandiosity, with needing admiration, and with a lack of empathy. Again, we're not going to get into the details of the DSM-5, but there's a specific number of criteria that needs to be present at the same time in order to meet this. So, there is a chance that your partner or someone in your life demonstrates some of these traits.
Don't we all
right.
Sometimes? I mean,
well, we do.
I could see moments where I can be selfish or I can act I think we all do. I think nobody's perfect here. And the
Absolutely.
Same with being bipolar, right? I think we can all probably, we're all a little bit of every label probably.
Yes. And I was surprised. I actually looked at the prevalence of these disorders, if you will. And for narcissistic, it's actually 0 to 6.2% of the population, which, if you think about it, is quite low in comparison to how often it comes up in my client population.
But that's why I think it's become sort of a, word of the street, if you can say that. It's not like, it is just, it's like slang. It's just used as, it's almost cool to use it, right? I mean, we can almost go there. It's.
So this makes me think about my role as a therapist. Is now then part of our work to help people get educated to understand that the label does not actually necessarily apply. Because where I think there's an element of education of saying, like, let's look into this. Let's look into
Well,
the
and
label.
responsibility as a clinician,
Yes.
to sort of dissect that and really make people think about, what does that actually mean? What are you saying? What is the clinical definition, but also what does it mean to you?
Right. And to me, furthermore, once the dynamic is established, well, again, what do you do about it?
What do you do about that's with anything? That can be the same with, saying, anxiety is another one that is so overused, right? I have anxiety, and so this is an excuse for how I act, or this is why I do this because I have anxiety, or I'm depressed. And I think we can talk about many other labels in a similar way, where it becomes sort of in a way a clutch, right?
Okay.
But it still doesn't answer the question, what do you do with it, right? Aside from taking medication, going to therapy, if that's what you choose to do, right? Because a lot of people are medicated for these diagnoses. But again, at the end of the day, you still have to do something with it.
Right. Both if you're the one that has it or is labeled with it, and if you are the one who isn't in the relationship. Both of these people would have certain responsibilities to then determine what happens after this label is used.
And what you do in relation to it, right? Because it's all about, how do you deal with another person that you're struggling with, who is either who you're labeling that, or who is labeling you as.
Also, I was thinking about how the label has an element of like temporarily calming you down, maybe if it helps you understand. But I was also thinking about the helplessness that comes with the label. If this person really is, does that mean I lose hope that things change? Is this going to be a long-term, forever struggle? Mm-hmm. But what's interesting is that I actually think that's an interesting question for everyone to ask themselves about the struggles in any relationship. These things that I don't like, the things that impact me negatively, are they something I'm willing to put up with or not? Regardless of whether they're named narcissist or bipolar, is this something that I have some power towards? In other words, like, can I have boundaries? Can I implement consequences? Can I step back from this, or do I have to take it? And so these questions, I think sometimes the label kind of just cements how much of a struggle it will be.
And those are the questions I'm sure you, as well as I, address in therapy, right? Those are the things of like, sort of, giving it color, right? And sort of finding meaning to it, I think is super important, because I think the helplessness piece is huge. And I think when people feel helpless, it's a real struggle.
What is it that allows us to feel free to diagnose people with mental illnesses or disorders and not physical? If you had a concern about a physical condition, you'd go to the doctor. But I just noticed that we culturally just feel comfortable kind of putting this on other people without understanding that there's a whole process.
It's a good question.
I don't even know the answer myself.
I don't know. I think maybe the mind is complex, right? We don't understand a lot of it still. And maybe that's part of it.
And I also think about how personal someone's mental state, how much of an impact that has on us, maybe more than someone's physical state. Maybe. I don't know.
Maybe. Although I can think of physical disabilities being equally as challenging, right, for some and for others. But I think it is a really interesting distinction in how we treat it and sort of manage it differently in society.
Well, I was thinking that not that it wouldn't impact, but that it would maybe feel more personal. Like, not that it wouldn't be a challenge, but I wonder, and again, I don't know that this is fact, but I wonder if there is something that feels more personal, more of like a personal attack or vulnerability that you have to someone else's mental state. If there's like a behavioral aspect to it.
Are you thinking there's shame around it?
No, but more like your physical diagnosis can impact me and be a great challenge for me to manage, and it can make me fearful, or I have to put time into caring for you, and all of those things can be true, but maybe it doesn't feel like a personal attack to me.
Interesting.
And what I think is that when bipolar or narcissistic comes up, people are feeling attacked. It's feeling like a personal.
Well, it's a threat. It's a threat on their personality, on their character, right? And that, I think that is a pretty big threat. And people get very anxious. And when that happens, and we sort of resort to sort of the automatic behavior, which is fight, flight, or freeze, right? And I think that really, really is true to what happens in a lot of cases. So we have to get to our questions and sort of a takeaway for today.
Yes.
And what are we going to leave our audience with? Elsa, do you have a few questions? And then I'll have a few things to think about and sort of reflect on.
Yes. So the first one I was thinking about is an invitation, really, for each one of you to think, what are you calling bipolar and narcissist? In other words, if you close your eyes and you think of what these labels look like, what do you immediately associate with it? Because I think that the possibility of changing the misuse of these labels comes from first understanding what we're attaching to them on a personal level. So maybe you realize that you don't really know, and hopefully that's an invitation for you to look more into it.
Another question would be, if you attach this label to a person of importance to you, how does that help you, and how may it not help you, right? And I think it may be both, but I think it is important to think about how does this serve me, and how may it not serve me to use it.
That's a great one, because just the clarity that would come from that would be useful to have.
Well, and I just want to add maybe to think about, when you are struggling with another person and you are really having a hard time with them, communicating with them, relating to them, connecting with them, then I think it is always helpful to remember that on the other side, the person that you are dealing with is equally having a hard time with you. And I think that sometimes takes you out of yourself and puts you in the other person's shoes where you can relate, because that is true. It's a two-way street. And as much as you think somebody is, difficult, toxic, they are also having a difficult time relating to you.
I love that, the reciprocity. It to some degree relates to the next question, which is, how does the relational dynamic change once these labels are used? And really, what options do you have, or what changes are you willing to implement? So, in other words, bringing back the power to each person individually. What are you willing to do about this? And how do you kind of prepare yourself to manage, whether it's considering ending the relationship or just, maybe setting boundaries and consequences, being clear about what you're tolerating, the role you play, etc. There's a million, thoughts that can come from this, but really what happens after the label is used.
I like that. It's almost like reclaiming, yourself, reclaiming independence and having a responsibility, right, to yourself too. And what do you then do with it? Another question would be, when we are in a relationship dynamic and jump to diagnoses and label others, is it really about the other, or is it more about calming your own anxiety?
Oof.
Elsa, did you hear that? Should I say that again?
I heard you.
Okay.
You just stopped me thinking. It was such a good question that I went into silent mode to reflect on that.
But I think that is, I think that's an important one, about how often we can sort of put people in a corner or in a box, and is it really about them, or is it really about, this is what calms me in the moment, and this is what I need, in order to function and deal with this?
Yeah, it's definitely a tool, and it can either be helpful or not. That's a great question. Do you think you would answer that from the perspective of like a percentage? How much is it? Because I would feel that if you're using that label, most people will say, well, it's definitely about what the other person is doing or not doing.
Well, I think it's if you start observing yourself better, I think you can notice it. Like when you label someone and you feel comfortable with that, and you can sort of take it out and put it on somebody else, it calms you. It brings down your anxiety, at least in the moment.
Yeah.
Of sort of like, okay, you are you are separate from me. You are the problem.
You are the problem. That's, I think, the most important part of that.
And I need to remove myself from you. And this makes me feel calmer, right? And if you have somebody join you in that, like let's think about a triangle, or you have somebody agree with you, that is even better. That calms you down even more, right? That
we
just
all
gives
agree,
you validation, right?
Yeah.
Of like, yes, it's not only me who thinks that. That person is, bipolar, they're, or they're a narcissist, or they're whatever it is. And I think it does sort of help us deal with our anxiety.
And if you can understand that label is a function of your coping mechanism, then what changes?
And how useful is it, in the long term?
Yeah.
In dealing with your relationships, does it make you simply cut off from people and, that's how you move on? Does that become a pattern in your life, or is there an alternative?
I love that. A lot to think about, ladies and gentlemen.
Absolutely. I wish we had, this is something we could talk about probably for much longer, but we have to end today's episode. It was a pleasure with you, Elsa.
It was a pleasure.
As always.
Yes, jinx.
And if you like what you're hearing, stay tuned for the next one.
Yes, and feel free to reach us on our Instagram or through our website to let us know if there are any topics that you want us to cover and talk about.
Great.
Okay.
Bye.